This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. My name is Catherine Taylor. And I'm delighted to be here tonight with my special guest, Nathan Douglas. I'm joined tonight by Nathan, who is an experienced deputy head teacher, and we'll be exploring the issues of teachers' professional identities and relating that to teacher retention.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Excellent. Good evening. And I'm delighted to welcome Nathan into the studio in just a moment. I'm just going to give you a bit of background information about Nathan, who I'm delighted to be sharing the show with tonight. I'm speaking to you, by the way, live from Buckinghamshire in the UK, and we've got Nathan Douglas with us this evening. He has been a primary school teacher in Birmingham for over 15 years, and the last 5 of those has been as a deputy head teacher. His areas of responsibility and interest include curriculum design, implementation, teaching and learning, attendance, closing the gap between disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged children, and excitingly, Nathan is nearing the completion of his professional doctorate in education and EdD, in which he has focused on teacher professional identity, and also he has been thinking about recruitment and retention. And I'm just going to bring Nathan into the studio. And welcome to you. Are you there?
Hello, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you so much for tuning in. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Yep, are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. And we're going to talk about professional identities throughout the show and the issue of teacher retention. But remember, if you are listening in live and would like to join us, either to post questions in the chat or to ask a question or call in later in the show, then please do download the Podbean app, visit ttradio.org and click on Listen Live on the homepage. This will take you directly to the show, and there you can post your comments, ask questions during our conversation, or call in to join in the conversation. I just want to welcome you, Nathan, and I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit just about how your day's been going.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's good to be here tonight. And yeah, I've had a busy day as always. You know, teaching is, you never know what you're going to enter into in terms of the day. No 2 days are the same. So yeah, a busy day, but I like to be kept busy, so all good there.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I just want to say hello to Tanya as well, who's joining us in the studio and has just said hello on the chat. And I hope you're going to enjoy the conversation, Tanya. Feel free to post comments and perhaps maybe even call in a bit later if you want to get involved. It's great to have you listening tonight. Nathan, let's get started. I wonder, let's start right at the beginning. What's inspired you in the first place to become a teacher, and how has that motivation really evolved over the course of your career?
So yeah, I think I am a typical cliche in terms of always wanted to be a teacher. So I was one of those kids who knew that I wanted to be a teacher from the get-go. And as a kid, I would be playing schools and, you know, pretending that I was the teacher, like being a proper geek. There's no doubt about that. And then, you know, through great support of my family, you know, put myself through uni and became a teacher. And the motivation really was I've always wanted and still want to make a difference to those around me. And I do genuinely believe that all children deserve the absolute best start in life. And that was a motivation for me to enter the profession. And then as I have remained in the profession and stayed in it for over 15 years now, and my career's evolved during that time, the motivation doesn't necessarily change, it just shifts. So rather than, I mean, the focus is always on the children, of course it is, but rather than the focus being primarily on the children, as I've become a manager and then a leader, your focus then goes towards your colleagues and making a difference in their lives. So
Mm.
helping them to become their best version of themselves, so that then they in turn can give the children their best. So the motivation is to help and make a difference. And as my career's gone on, that's shifted from pupils to colleagues.
No, that's really brilliant. Thank you, Nathan. I just wonder. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit more loudly into your device this evening, because you're clear, but I think I might be louder than you. If that's all right.
Yeah, not a problem. I can do that.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. And I really hear what you're saying, actually, and I really resonates with me, because I do quite a lot of work with ECTs, and I think it's so important to encourage healthy professionalism and healthy work-life balance and that kind of thing. And I guess we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I always worry that we have to maintain this idea of what we mean by professional identity, what we mean by professionalism, um, in tension with not allowing people to develop unhealthy working habits. And I say this in the full ironic knowledge of the pair of us sitting here having a conversation about teaching at 9 o'clock in the evening. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah, completely. I think teaching has always been a lifestyle choice, and that's how I
Mm,
always describe it to people going into the profession. It is a lifestyle choice. It needs to fit around the wider version of you, be that as a parent, as a friend, as whatever that might be in your own personal life. But I think today more than ever, there is an expectation that you as a teacher are going to be incredibly selfless,
mm,
and put the needs of the school and the children before the needs of yourself. And I think it's very sad that we've got to a point where that selflessness has almost become an expectation, and
mm.
what word I'm looking for, a requirement almost if you're going to survive in the profession. So yeah, it does make sense.
Yeah, I was reading something actually about that, and I think one word I've heard to describe it is it's kind of like a greedy profession, and it sort of demands your time, and that becomes normalized, and then it demands more, and that becomes normalized, and I think it can kind of really become really quite unhealthy if it's allowed to.
It's a very restless profession, isn't it? It's
Mm,
never stable. It's never standing still, which I think is good because you have to um, respond to the changes, and you have to respond to the needs of the England, and then your context, and then your class in front of you. But I think that also comes with an element of unhealth unhealthiness,
mm,
because it's never resting and it's always on the go. Teachers are having to respond to that in the moment, and I think the pandemic is a perfect example of that. When things were changing by the hour, every hour, and
yes.
school leaders, particularly in the early days, school leaders were getting things ready at 10 a.m. and then by 2 p.m. it was a completely different set of guidance, if at all
Yeah.
any guidance. So yeah, that was exacerbated, I felt. But yeah, generally speaking, it's a very restless profession.
I think you're right, and I just I want to bring us round to this idea of professional identity. How would you describe, if you were going to describe your own professional identity? I guess this can be broken down into a couple of sub questions. What would you just how would you characterize your own, and also where do you think it comes from? If that's a sort of slightly odd question.
No, no, not odd at all. So, in terms of where professional identity comes from, the bulk of the research and the bulk of the generally accepted understanding of professional identity is that it comes from the context that you're in ultimately.
Mm,
And teachers who have been in the profession for a long time are able to take their identity and mold it around the context they're in, and vice versa. So context will feed into identity, and then the identity will feed into the context as sort of like an ongoing relationship. But
mm,
that's in the moment. Over time, professional identity is built up from things that make you a person. So your age, your gender, how you identify, your social class, things like that. But also your values and belief systems build up professional identities, experiences, feelings, emotions, relationships. There's so much to it. It's such a very dynamic like glob as to who you are
mm.
as a person. And again, a bit like profession, it's always changing. It's never finished. It's never full. It's never in. in a final form. And I was thinking about this the other day, as you said earlier, I'm coming close to handing in my thesis, and
Mm.
I didn't want to go down this rabbit hole because I thought I've ran out of time and ran out of words anyway. But do we actually own our own professional identities? Is it something that we have, or is it something that we actually just use and apply in the settings and the context that we're in? So I
That's
don't know
a
if you've answered your
really, really
question there.
interesting question. I mean, I don't know. It's more like a sort of, I don't know, symbiosis or something.
Mm,
You kind of you're connected to it. I mean, a lot of my thinking is about sort of the ecological view, where we've got our environment feeding into us and us feeding into our environment, and I just think that it is a very inseparable kind of thing. I mean, in terms of your own professional identity, if you were to sort of summarize your professional self in a few words, how would you
mm.
characterize yourself, do you think?
I think there is a need to make a difference,
Uh-huh.
and that sort of drives my reason for remaining in the profession and
Mm,
continuing to strive for the highest possible standards I can in my work life. So that's always there, as are the children,
mm,
and their needs and their wants, and the staff, and again their needs and their wants. Um, which brings us back to some of the selfless points I was making a moment ago. But then I think it's all my previous roles and all my previous responsibilities make up my professional identity now, because you learn from your experiences as you go along.
mm, mm.
So they're a part of myself. Um, but yeah, I think first and foremost, it's the people that you're with that have, well, the people that I'm with have a big voice inside my head, and drive a
Yes.
lot of my actions and reactions. So yeah, people I think would be the answer.
Excellent. No, it's a very interpersonal job, I feel, a very
Mm,
interpersonal vocation, and it's a very emotional one as well. And I think, maybe you can comment on this, as we've become a profession which has been um, inspected, and I
yeah.
don't have a problem with accountability, of course, but as we have been become a profession which has been subject to inspection, when it's so personal and it's so tied up with your identity and your sense of yourself and your vocation, it can
Mm.
feel, criticism can feel personal, can't it? And I wonder what you would say to teachers who perhaps feel a bit defensive, and either consciously or unconsciously feel got at by a system that wants to perhaps measure and categorize.
It's really hard, isn't it? Because you can't escape accountability, and no one would ever want to, because we
Hmm.
should be checking that the schools are giving the children the best possible start to life. But I'm just it's incredibly hard to detach yourself from the Ofsted inspectorate, isn't it?
Mm,
And I think if we sort of go back before going forwards in terms of the question you've asked, at the moment Ofsted have replaced their one-word summary gradings for schools,
mm,
and yet has anything actually really changed, or is anything going to change in the long term? Because they're looking now at the sort of Welsh model to inspections, where a school is given is like an inspection report in the
mm,
style of a typical school report.
mm,
But I'm wondering whether anything is really going to change based on the murmurings and the rumours that are going around in terms of a colour coded system or a traffic light system for different areas of schools. I saw a rumour the other day of like almost a Leica type scale
mm,
of different areas of school going from, number one to number five, but they had words for them. So I don't think anything is ever really going to change there, and that will inevitably impact the teachers moving forwards with that, because it is a profession that is so tied up in a teacher's personality and a
mm.
teacher's time and effort and energy. So it's I'm not sure we're ever going to be at a point where you can move yourself away from what the inspectorate is saying, because ultimately I've been teaching a long time now, 15 years or so, and I've never met a teacher who's gone into the profession to actively do a bad job on purpose. So there's that element
No.
of care is the point I'm making. Teachers genuinely care. So when a one size fits all inspectorate comes in and tries to impose on teachers what they think, even if this is done in the nicest possible way, teachers still deeply care about the job. So
Mm,
they're going to almost be defensive, and it's very hard, I think, to come away from that. Like, I think this is the perfect time now to really reform the inspectorate in terms
mm,
of maybe having localized um, like hubs, almost inspection hubs that understand the context that you're working in, rather than that one size fits all. But judging from the murmurs that are going on, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's really tricky, isn't it? And I guess as we are people who do have so much pride in our work and work
Mm,
really, really hard, it can be quite a tough message sometimes, especially from people you feel maybe are kind of quite
mm,
disconnected, and as you say, not completely familiar with the context that
mm,
you're serving. I
mm,
wonder if let's try and be a bit more optimistic. Optimistic.
mm.
We say that teaching is a great source of satisfaction and pride to people who
Yes.
take it on as a vocation. What would you say brings you the most satisfaction and pride in your work?
it, it's that light bulb moment, but
Mm,
again, it's a light bulb moment from children and staff in my role. So I still have a daily teaching commitment where I'm in front of children and teaching them, and seeing something click into place for a
mm,
child, it never gets old, it never gets boring, and it's absolutely joyous to see. And then they are running with whatever concept or whatever skill you just taught them. That's amazing. But then the
mm,
same with the teachers as well. So a lot of my role involves coaching teachers and mentoring new teachers to the profession, and even mentoring aspiring middle leaders who are just taking on a subject for the first time. And that light bulb moment can be applied to them when they think of something really fantastic for their subjects, or they put something in place in the classroom that works really well, and they're able to talk it through and talk about why they did it, and you as a, or me as a person had an input into that. That's a massive source of satisfaction for me. And I think the further away you come from children in terms of having a full-time teacher commitment, then a part-time, then an even smaller one, depending on what your roles are, I think to continue to thrive in the profession, you have to find your sources of satisfaction somewhere else. Because
mm.
otherwise, if I wanted to, I could go a whole week without seeing children because of the nature of my role, but I would never want to do that because I came into the profession to teach. And I
Yes.
think sometimes there can be a jar with new leaders who think I can't do this because they haven't maintained that connection with the classroom. So finding that source of job satisfaction is so important. And for me, it comes from working with the staff now and really developing them.
Yeah, no, that I see what you're saying. I mean, I feel the same in many ways. It's trying to find a pathway through, which means that you don't become disconnected, but you still
Mm,
can grow yourself and still learn more things and develop your own sort of practice. So no, I think that's a really important point. Nathan, if you don't mind, I'm just going to play some of our messages, and when we come back, I'm just going to move on with our conversation to talk about the wider society and the challenges that you think that teachers in the UK are facing. So we'll just take a quick break and come back with that question after this.
Parentkind are a national charity representing parent views and voice and championing parental participation in education and school life. By fostering strong school-parent partnerships, we can boost student attendance, improve behaviour and enhance academic performance. When parents actively participate, students thrive. Join the movement that's reshaping education for the better. Visit parentkind.org to learn more about reaping the rewards of working in partnership with parents.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
Hey educators, ready to kickstart 2025 with world-class inspiration? Then don't miss Bet UK, happening January 22nd to 24th in London. Get fired up in our high-energy arena hosted by Laura McInerney with an incredible lineup. Hear from racing driver and inclusion advocate Nicholas Hamilton and the poetic power duo Michael Rosen and Christian Foley. Plus, don't miss the legendary Stephen Fry discuss the human approach to AI. Explore hundreds of hours of unmissable content, the latest edtech, and free CPD opportunities to supercharge your skills. All for free, so why wait? Head to betshow.com and book your ticket now. Let's make 2025 your best year yet.
And welcome back to Nathan as well. And before we had that quick break, we were just about to start talking about wider society and the value of teachers and recognition of teachers. And I wonder, Nathan, what you think about sort of the social status of teachers in the sort of current context. What are your views on that?
I think sadly, a lot has changed in the past 4 or 5 years. And I think, again, we mentioned it briefly earlier, the pandemic has got a lot to blame for this. So I'm not sure whether teachers have ever been fully respected or given the credence they deserve from wider society, just because of a lack of understanding of what actually goes on. And, because everybody goes to school, therefore everybody has an opinion on it. It's a bit like everybody goes to the doctors, therefore everyone has opinions on how terrible GPs are, for example. Now bad the NHS is for the waiting lists, etc. Because we've all been there, we feel we can have an opinion on it. And at the start of the pandemic, when lockdown first happened and parents were having to homeschool their children, teachers were fantastic and teachers were great. And oh my goodness, I don't know how you do this because I've got 2 children at home and it's driving me mad. But then it very quickly, and I think the media is a lot to blame here as well. Teachers having all this time off and they did nothing during the pandemic apart from putting their feet up, and then they still had their 6 weeks, and we were having parties in the staff room and things like that. And I don't think we've ever quite got over that. And I think as the pandemic has, schools go back to normal, we've not quite got over that. And then when you have teachers striking, again, the narrative from the media portrays teachers to be extremely bad and they're striking again. So I'm not quite sure the profession's given the credence it deserves.
Yeah, no, I totally hear what you're saying. It's very, very challenging. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to homeschool my own child, but it's it's one of those things. I do think that it was a real eye-opener for many. And by the way, to anyone listening, we have got a lot of vacancies, so if you're considering getting into teaching, now is a good time. There's plenty of bursaries sloshing around at the moment. The holidays are great. But if when we think about these things, it is a complex relationship, I think it's fair to say. So what do you think the biggest challenges are? And I want to separate out the real ones from perhaps the kind of the presumed ones or the perceived ones. What do you think the real challenges are for teachers in England today?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about 2 things, and the first one is a bit more controversial, and the second one is, I think, less known, shall we say. So I think we're never ever going to get past workload in the teaching profession. And, so many studies, including studies by the Department for Education, are showing workload to be the biggest influencing factor as to why teachers are leaving the profession. Now, for me, and this is where the controversy comes in a little bit, and you will always have people who will disagree with what I'm about to say. When we think about workload, if we think really carefully about the fact that teachers get 13 weeks holiday a year, teachers are going to have to put in hours before school and after school. That is inevitable. You're going to have to do that in order to do your job, not even well, but adequately. But if you were to factor in, let's say, out of those 13 weeks, if you were to look at your working week as time in lieu, then it's possible to reframe some of the negative narrative that permeates all the way through the profession about workload. Because if I add up all the hours that I do, but see my workload as time in lieu and the hours I put as time in lieu, I still get more time off than a typical non-teaching worker, for example, a nurse or a police officer or someone who works in retail, someone who works in law. You still get more time off. And I think that's the danger that some early careers teachers enter into the profession thinking that my holidays are my holidays. I'm getting 13 weeks off a year and they're my holidays. That's not necessarily true. And I think that we need to be very careful when we're campaigning for teacher recruitment to reframe what actually are the holidays. Because whenever I talk to university trainees who are just about to enter the profession, I emphasise that you must view your holidays as time in lieu. And if you're sensible with your time, you will still get more holidays than 4 weeks a year, which is typically what non-teachers get. So to go back to your question, I think that workload is a massive difficulty, but it can be managed, especially if you reframe it as I'm working till 7 o'clock tonight, but this is time in lieu in a couple of weeks' time when I'm going to get another week off. But I think the main reason that teachers are leaving the profession and one of the biggest challenges that they're facing is because accountability is just so variable. And there's no standard way of holding teachers to account. And you might have two schools in a square mile block, and the school A does A, B, and C for accountability. It's done with the teachers. It's inclusive. Teachers have a voice. It's low stakes, but it's still very, very thorough and very well applied. But then school B, a mile down the road, it could be very draconian. It could be done it could be done the way it is done because they've always done it that way. It could be used as a big stick. And I think that unfortunately, going into schools nowadays is like a roulette wheel when it comes to accountability. You just don't know what you're going to get. My own research found that the teachers thrived off accountability and they almost needed it to survive and thrive in the profession. But a lot of these teachers described accountability from the school A that I was just metaphorically talking about, that school where it's done with and it's supportive and it's helpful and it's almost a form of CPD as well in some cases. But I think where accountability is wrong, it and done badly, shall we say, it can drive teachers out. So
I think that's that's a really interesting point. And I don't know about you, but I've sort of been dabbling a little. I've been getting a bit interested in sort of the notion of psychological safety and sort of collaborative learning and agency and feelings of collegiality and trust and so forth in the workplace. And I definitely feel that just like children in many ways, there's got to be some structure, there's got to be some goals, there's got to be something, some rigor to it. I personally, I find it really hard if I'm underemployed. I really struggle with that. I like to feel like I'm doing my best and striving and all of those things, but I also don't like to I don't like workload for workload's sake rather. So repetition of tasks which could be done more efficiently. I don't like duplication of tasks, but I do like to work hard and have clear goals and be able to take risks, and perhaps it goes wrong, perhaps it goes right, but it's all very supportive and all of that thing. And I think you're absolutely right to note that there are some incredibly brilliant schools, amazing leaders, people really thriving, and there's also some that are really not. And I guess as a researcher as well, it's really hard to get at those places because they probably don't want to engage with researchers, and they might curate what they say. So I think there's probably if you scratch the surface in some places, it might not be a great picture. Is that something that's come out from your research?
A little bit, yes. teachers in the research did describe some practices that they wanted reassurances that their names and stuff would be anonymised and pseudonymised so that nothing could come back on them. So there was elements of that for sure. But generally speaking, what I found in my own research was that the groups of teachers, their perceptions were that the accountability was needed and it was helpful, and they personally needed to thrive and survive in the profession as well. So I went into my research almost thinking I was going to find a group of teachers that described accountability very negatively.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't the case at all. And I'm wondering whether that has something to say about the teachers themselves. I mean, the average amount of years they've been teaching was just under 16 years as an average collective. So there's an element there of, are they institutionalized? Is this all they know? Is this the only alternative? Is it because they can't see any alternatives past it? So there is all that to factor in.
That's really interesting, because I wonder a little bit, and I think in some ways our research areas there's an overlap there, because I've been looking at perceptions of culture, and I do think, when we think about professional identities, that's an element of your life. It's an element of your professional, your vocational life, and you want to take pride in it and you want to do your best with it. But at some point you get a TLR, at some point you get, might have to teach outside of your subject specialism. You might even, I don't know, you might even have a family, you might have young children, you might have older parents or relatives or caring responsibilities. You might have all kinds of personal issues that come out of it. And we do find that perhaps there's a tension between people's professional identities and the demands of their lives, and I suppose that's when it becomes rather tricky. I think I take your point on board entirely, that we need to think of our workload in terms of the time off in lieu and so forth. And I think that's absolutely right, and I think people can take that view. But if your kid's got to go to A&E or your mum's fallen down the stairs, then you've got to deal with it. So I think there's would you say there's sort of a group of teachers who are fighting on more than one front, if you know what I mean?
Oh, completely. And to go back to the teachers that I worked with in my research, whenever there was a clash that you just described, or a bit of a conflict that you were just describing, the teachers were very unanimous in they pushed whatever the non-teaching element was, and often this was something more personal, they pushed that completely to the side and completely down in order to prioritise whatever the school need was. So yeah, you are certainly talking about a war on two fronts almost there.
So sorry, can I just clarify what you mean by that? Would you say that they perhaps would put an admin task to one side and focus on the essentials of the teaching, rather than sort of so that they could attend to their personal need as well? So just to clarify what you're saying there.
No, so it's the opposite of that. If anything cropped up that detracted from the teaching and learning and giving the children in their class the absolute best, then it was pushed to the side. I mean, one of the teachers, but pretty much when I quote this, it's pretty much word for word, she said that if there's no time for me as a person, as a human, then so be it. And that was, pretty much word for word what she was saying. So, we've got a group of very selfless teachers out there that shouldn't need to be. It shouldn't have to be that way.
No.
But for some reason, it just is. And I think it goes back to the point we were talking about at the start of this discussion, where the teaching profession is so restless. We've almost come away from, why. I wonder if as a country, do we actually know our why anymore? Is it to be top of the league tables, or is it to give children the best starting line so they can go on and do whatever they want to do?
No, that's really interesting, and I kind of links on to the next sort of question, really, which is about those teachers. it's very interesting to talk to the teachers who are still there, who've been there for a decade plus or so forth. But there's quite a lot of teachers that aren't there anymore because they have exited the profession or are seriously considering it. What do you think is pushing them out, do you think?
So the latest statistic, as of I think it was June this year, is that around about 13% are leaving within 12 months, 20% leave within 3 years, and 55% leave within 12 years. So you've got a workforce that is just not stable. And I think they're being pushed out for what we were discussing earlier. You've got the workload, which you're never going to escape from. And I don't just mean the workloads of classroom teachers either, as well. Like the workload of, there's a lot of things I'm reading at the moment of the workload, particularly of Senkos, who are just absolutely
Oh
overwhelmed.
yeah.
And here in Birmingham, there's certainly a special education needs crisis with there's just no spaces in special needs schools. So these children coming into mainstream, and it's putting immense pressure on Senkos, a lot of whom are still, class based or have that teacher commitment. So workload's massive. But again, for me, it comes back to accountability and the ways in which these teachers are held to account is driving some of them out, I feel. Particularly, if we're thinking about a term called hyper accountability, where, everything you do is you're held to account for, from a parental conversation on the school gates at the start of the day or the end of the day, which could come back on the teacher, to standards at the end of Key Stage 2 and phonics and GLD and reception. It's constant. So
It's really hard as well. No, I think that's, when people are second guessing themselves, not wanting to say the right thing, not wanting to say the wrong thing, or always trying to say the right thing. That's really, really tough one, because you don't have that psychological safety, do you? And I think as well, when we've got people who are, I don't know the best way to describe it, but no, it's gone. It's going to come back to me. While I get my brain in gear, I'm very sorry. While I get my brain in gear, I'm just going to take a comment actually from Paul. Paul, thank you for joining us in the studio. And you've just had your annual performance management. You need a personal target for the next year, and I have no idea what to suggest. My head wants me to go down the NPQ SLT route, but I'm not sure management is for me. Any suggestions? I think that's a really interesting one, actually. I know what I think. Nathan, I wonder, what do you advise to somebody if they are being asked to come up with a target?
So this is a major problem we've got in our profession, and the assumption is that if you're a really good teacher, you are automatically going to be a really good manager. And that's not to say that you're not going to be, particularly if you've got good support behind you and good mentoring behind you. But when I first took on a management role, I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. And I just was making it up as I went along. So to answer your question, if you don't feel that the NPQ route or some form of management route is for you, then that's absolutely fine. My advice to you would be to have something along the lines of being a model of good practice for others, team teaching with others to help develop their pedagogy from a classroom, chalkboard facing point of view. It doesn't necessarily have to be managing a subject or taking on a subject in any sort of capacity. It could be just developing good quality teaching and learning alongside, your colleagues. Failing that, it could be that there's some small element of the school that you are really interested in. So, for example, after school provision for special needs children, or I don't know, developing a choir maybe for disadvantaged people, disadvantaged children. So it could be anything along those lines. It doesn't have to be leadership and management. It can be, teaching and learning, or some small matter in school that you've noticed could do with addressing.
And I think that's a really important point. I mean, it's, if you're following your interests, there's always hopefully something that you think, oh, I wish I could find out more about that, or become really interested in this. And I need to say as well, some of the NPQs are are specialist in a sort of a discipline like literacy or something like that. So it could be that there's an MPQ which is not management focused. So that may be something to consider as well. Okay, so we've got a couple. I've got to play the news, got to play a couple of messages. I'm going to do that. And then when we come back, Nathan, I'd really like to turn our attention to CPD and the way that we try to perhaps curate, steer, nurture, however you might want to term it, professional identities in our schools. So we'll come back in a few minutes just with that question.
Parentkind are a national charity representing parent views and voice and championing parental participation in education and school life. By fostering strong school-parent partnerships, we can boost student attendance, improve behaviour and enhance academic performance. When parents actively participate, students thrive. Join the movement that's reshaping education for the better. Visit parentkind.org to learn more about reaping the rewards of working in partnership with parents.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Hey educators, ready to kickstart 2025 with world-class inspiration? Then don't miss Bet UK, happening January 22nd to 24th in London. Get fired up in our high-energy arena hosted by Laura McInerney, with an incredible lineup. Hear from racing driver and inclusion advocate Nicholas Hamilton and the poetic power duo Michael Rosen and Christian Foley. Plus, don't miss the legendary Stephen Fry discuss the human approach to AI. Explore hundreds of hours of unmissable content, the latest edtech, and free CPD opportunities to supercharge your skills. All for free. So why wait? Head to betshow.com and book your ticket now. Let's make 2025 your best year yet.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC Norfolk news website focuses on the national issue of school attendance. The report states that persistent absence from schools is higher in Norfolk than the national average. At secondary school level, the Norfolk total is at 38.1%, compared to the national average of 28.3%. And for primary schools, it is 18.9%, compared to 17.2%. The BBC sat in on hearings at magistrates' courts to hear the human stories behind the national issue. One parent told magistrates she was frightened of her son and had no control over him, whilst another said issues with the child using school toilets had led to school refusal. One family explained that their own ill health had affected their ability to take primary-age pupils to school, and restrictive shift patterns at work had made it even more difficult. Representatives from the local authority made comments after the hearings, reminding of the importance of ensuring a child's attendance to school, and it's as high as possible, as many times as possible. It pointed to government guidance which schools must follow to ensure regular attendance, with a focus on support to remove barriers to attendance overall. According to the TES magazine, private schools lose their GCSE results edge after adjustments for students' backgrounds. Researchers say state school students perform better in English, maths and science, but private schools still perform better in creative arts subjects. Researchers from UCL say the findings could have implications for parents deciding on the best education for their child, and raise questions about the relative strength of creative education in state schools. The analysis is based on GCSE results from state and independent schools from the 2016 to 17 cohort. The data from the UK Millennium Cohort study follows the lives of 19,000 young people born across all 4 home nations in 2000 to 2002. Before adjusting, private school students achieved 4/5 of a grade higher across all GCSE subjects, assuming 8 were studied. Once socioeconomic status was accounted for, the researchers said this difference was statistically indistinguishable from zero. But when just the core subjects were considered, state schools had the edge, achieving on average 2/3 of a grade higher in maths, 2/5 of a grade higher in science, and a slight advantage in English after all of the adjustments. Professor Jake Anders said it has been long assumed that the private sector outperforms the state, and that over the past 2 decades, state schools have increased their focus on core subjects. Full details can be found in the TES magazine online. Schools Week covers a story on school leader stress after Education Support released its annual Teacher Wellbeing Index. Although it reported that the overall wellbeing score of teachers and leaders had improved slightly, Chief Executive Sinead McBratey warned disturbingly high rates of stress, anxiety and burnout continue to affect staff, exacerbated by pupil and parent behaviours and a lack of support outside of school for children and young people. The article lists 7 issues, with 78% of teachers reported as being stressed, although there was a drop from 39% to 35% in staff reporting a mental health issue. On a positive note, the proportion of staff who said they considered their organisation's culture had a negative effect on their well-being fell from 55% to 50%, and 27% of staff now experience a culture which is positive for their well-being, up from 22% last year. Full details can be found in Schools Week on their online article. The Guardian covers claims that schools and colleges in England are failing in their legal duty to prevent and address racism. Campaigners are calling for the national curriculum in England to include an explicit anti-racism focus, with Black history as a compulsory subject. In a letter to the Prime Minister, a group of leaders from several organisations have warned that racism is holding all young people back, and calls for urgent action to address the impacts of a growing crisis. The letter goes on to say that the planned review of the national curriculum offers a perfect opportunity to embed diverse, anti-racist content. Recommendations in the letter include ensuring a whole school approach to tackling racism be implemented, the DFE to treat racism as a safeguarding issue, and for anti-racism guidance to be published for all schools and colleges. The organisations signing up to the letter include the Diana Award, Everyday Racism, and the African Caribbean Education Network, among others. A Department for Education spokesperson said, "Racism and discrimination have absolutely no place in our schools, and we have launched an independent curriculum and assessment review aimed at delivering a curriculum that reflects the diversities of our society." Finally, several parts of the UK were affected by the weather in recent days. More than 100 schools across the Scottish Highlands, 30 in North Wales, and almost 200 in Devon and Cornwall shut due to snow. Many schools affected, however, were able to continue teaching pupils, as online learning, developed during the pandemic, was activated for the majority of pupils. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Welcome back to our listeners, and welcome back to you, Nathan. I thought that story, I don't know if you caught it in the middle of the news bulletin, was very encouraging, talking about how the proportion of teachers who responded to the survey saying that they felt their culture was supportive had increased, and the amount of reported sort of mental health issues and distress and the negativity that we spoke about earlier, that had actually gone down. I think that's really encouraging, and I hope that continues.
Absolutely, it was encouraging to hear.
Absolutely. So before we broke for the news, I posed a question about culture and the impact of culture on teacher retention and the role of CPD in school in sort of curating, supporting, nudging. I don't know how it's best to describe it. Teacher professional identities into one of, I want to say resilience, but I don't mean to imply that teaching ought to be something that you need to withstand. I think it should be spun more positively. But how does teacher CPD feed into this narrative?
My own research, oops, not my phone flying there. My own research shows that it's not necessarily about the teachers receiving CPD. It's actually more about the teachers being given the opportunity to develop CPD for others themselves. So
Yeah.
utilising their own experiences and their own teacher professional identities to actually like pass on and inspire the next generation of teachers coming through. I think there's a bit of a danger that exists that if we just keep throwing all this, and some of the CPD out there is really high quality and absolutely fantastically thought through, but if we just keep continually throwing this at teachers, then these teachers will inevitably remain in the profession. But I don't think that's the case at all. It's about the timing of it and the appropriateness of it, and whether that member of staff needs it or wants it and will buy into that change. So it's really important for teacher retention, but it's also an important factor to consider that these teachers who are experienced can draw on their wealth of experience and pass it on to others. And that could then become their source of motivation, their source of job satisfaction to remain in the profession as well. So I think it's two sides of the same coin. We need to receive good quality CPD, and then these teachers who will be in the profession need the opportunity, if they want the opportunity, to pass it on. And that links back to what Paul was saying earlier in his comments, that it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who's been in the profession for a long time all of a sudden becomes a manager. Great if they want to, but if they don't want to, maybe they can be used as a small instrument for change in their own school, and that could lead to good motivation and good job satisfaction.
Absolutely, and I think that's so important, and it kind of links to where I wanted to go next. And I think, if I remember correctly, you were talking earlier about your role as a coach of teachers, perhaps in a mentoring role, and sort of early career professionals, and perhaps more experienced professionals as well. What do you think the role of coaching, mentorship, and peer collaboration has in promoting healthy professional identities?
I think it's how it's done, and when it's done properly and really well, it can have a profound impact on a positive impact, profound impact, I should say, a positive one, on that person's professional identity, which then, in my very strong view, will lead to them remaining in the profession, because that teacher is being given the time and effort and energy to really have their professional identity nurtured and grown into somebody who they want to become. Again, though, I think there's a danger of calling something coaching and mentoring, and actually it's accountability via the back door. I've seen that in a few occasions and a few instances, and some of the teachers in my own research did touch on it as well, whereby they're sat in a coaching session in inverted commas or in a mentoring session, but actually the person who is in the seat of the coach or mentor is actually just embedding and entrenching the accountability measures that are already in their schools by putting it onto the coachee or the mentee, whatever word you want to use, to then go and facilitate that even further. So there's a danger of that, I feel.
No, I agree. And I think it's really, really important that, as I talk a lot as part of my role about sort of expert-led conversations, and I have so many teachers who would say to me, I only know about leading primary, key stage 2 geography. I don't actually know about, maths. How can I coach the maths teacher or whatever? And one of the things that I think is quite important to kind of think about is the expertise doesn't have to be in the subject. The expertise can be in their skill as a coach. There's a lot of literature out there that says, head teachers, senior leaders would really benefit once you've been on all the courses and been quite experienced and all the rest of it. There is almost like a ceiling of what you can learn, and actually you become better through your personal development. And so really high quality professional coaches at the top end are really advocated for. And yet we kind of cobble together sometimes peer coaching within schools where, either you get the situation as you describe where it's accountability by the back door, or people just pair up with their friends and then just say they've done it, which
Yeah,
also might
completely.
occasionally happen. So
Yeah.
it's about that kind of that rigorous process, high quality professional conversation in a psychologically safe kind of context, which I think people crave. And as part of my research, I've noticed that when people are kind of left to their own devices because they're a safe pair of hands, inverted commas, they actually find that really demotivating and kind of feel like nobody really
Lonely.
minds what they do. And that's not a great
Yeah.
situation.
No, it comes back to people, doesn't it? And I think
Yeah.
really great leaders out there, and this is off the back of the comment you made about it shouldn't matter if it's geography or it shouldn't matter if it's mathematics. Really great leaders will know what makes their staff tick and will know and understand their staff as people first and foremost,
Mm.
because you as a human being, you as a person, feed into your teacher professional identity or your teacher persona. So if as a leader you know what makes your staff tick, then whether you call it coaching, whether you call it mentoring, whether you call it CPD or just high quality discussions that you've put time aside for, you're going to have a really positive impact on that person, and therefore you'll have an impact on that person's pedagogy.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, we talked earlier about workload. I don't think we're going to crack it. I think it requires sort of quite fundamental reform. But I do kind of feel that this is important and time ought to be put aside for it. And it ought to be structurally supported in the school day. And that does have a cost associated with it. So if I had a magic wand, I'd be saying, let's have either just a bit more, have your PPA, but also have some structured time for these conversations. I really think it would, have a really big impact. Turning to what you think, if you had a magic wand, what do you think you would want to see change in our education system to have a really positive impact?
I really advocate that teacher professional identity needs to be in national policy. I feel so strongly about this. The only mention of identity in any form of English educational policy is in the in the early career framework, sorry.
Yeah.
Um, Early career teachers must have an understanding of their children's identities, and that's literally the only reference to identity at all. There's no reference to teacher professional identity. The research that I've done shows that teacher professional identity has a really positive retentive factor, and there are negative complications within that. So, for example, the selflessness I talked about earlier, and the fact that teachers shouldn't have to be selfless. But what I overwhelmingly found, is that teacher professional identity is a massively retentive factor for the teachers I worked with. So by putting it in national policy and giving it the credence that it really deserves, I feel that we will never be able to really turn the tide on the retention crisis that we've got with, hundreds and hundreds of people leaving the profession. And these statistics are worsening. They're not improving, they're worsening. Then that's what I would fix. Get teacher identity to national policy, have it so that it's a supportive mechanism through university training into the ECF and into post ECTs as well, with training for schools, which is a massive investment. And I understand that. And I understand that the probability of this ever happening is really slim. But if it were to happen, then I really feel that we wouldn't be facing a teacher retention issue in years to come.
No, I, it's all very sort of wishful thinking, isn't it? But I do worry that, well, perhaps it's coming to a time where somebody's going to have to do something a bit different, because the things we've done up till now, perhaps have not solved the problems that they set out to solve, shall we say?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah, go
ECF
for
has
it.
had no impact. Sorry,
No, no, it's all right.
the ECF has had no impact on teacher retention. The Education Support Commission's report on retention was talking about workload, and that was 5 years ago. And then you've got the fact that Ofsted are reforming, which I don't think is going to have any impact as either. So something needs to be done because, as you rightly said, the things that are being done are not actually changing a thing.
And this is the thing, I mean, just to sort of say something about the ECF, I do think particularly the second year of the ECF does have a pretty decent structure for professional reflection and, practitioner inquiry. And it does have mentoring built in as well. But there's a real cliff edge, once you're into year 3, then that's all gone, and the real life hits you like a truck, and you can't, it all goes out the window. Actually, what I'd love to see is something like a space, a protected structural space with quality coaches and mentors who, it can become part of your TLR, whatever, to continue that, and also with an expectation there's someone above you who does that for you too. So that we can all perpetuate this high quality professional pride and so forth. But I don't think anyone's listening to the likes of me. Maybe one day. we should start some kind of petition, Nathan, and take it down to government and demand change immediately.
That sounds good.
Brilliant. Well, we've come to the end of our show, and it is now 10 o'clock at night, and we definitely need to be considering our workload. So I'm going to bring our conversation to a close, but I'm just so happy to have had you on the show, Nathan. Thank you so much to my special guest, Nathan Douglas, who we have been exploring together the issues of teacher professional identities and relating these to issues of teacher retention. So thank you very much for your time this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Please do come back again and tell us more about your research. I know you're very close to the end, so very good luck with that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you've been listening to The Late Late Show with Catherine Taylor, and I've been talking tonight to Nathan Douglas, and we have been talking about teacher professional identities. Do join us online to carry on the debate. We'll be posting on our socials, and we'd love to hear what you think about the issues we've spoken about this evening. There are many other Teacher Talk radio shows on the podcast all week, on live as well, on Podbean and wherever you get your podcasts from. So please do tune in and join in those conversations. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.